Here come the drums. Welcome to the Mark Peterson Show, and I'm your host, Mark Anthony Peterson. This is the show where I give you news and views and opinions from a Blackish point of view. In today's show, I'm going to talk about 5 reasons why the Atlanta Public School Board got it wrong when they chose not to renew Dr. Meria-Carstarphen's contract. On September the 9th, 2019, Chairman of the board, Jason Estevez, announced that they were not going to renew Dr. Carstarphen's contract, despite the fact that several high celebrities like Ambassador Young encouraged the board to do so. Initially, the board did not release how board members voted on her contract, and there's nothing dubious about that. HR matters are typically discussed behind closed doors and kept confidential. I mean, would you want your business out on Front Street? But we do now know how each of the board members voted, and we now understand some of the underlying issues that caused there to be a conflict between a very successful superintendent and the board. We know that Chairman Estevez, Cynthia Brown, Leslie Grant, and Michelle Olympiadadis and Erica Mitchell all voted against. Cardis Wood, Ishe Collins, Nancy Meister voted for Dr. Carstarphen. Now, before we go into the details of why this board has a conflict with this very successful superintendent, I want to take you back to 2010, 11, and 12, when this same school district was suffering from a cheating scandal that was built on the back of No Child Left Behind. Many administrators, teachers, and the superintendent were charged criminally for the cheating scandal that rocked the country. Now, it wasn't the only one. There were other school districts around the country, but a predominantly black school district and black superintendent found their way on the front pages of every major news magazine, TV show, you name it, as this was prosecuted because of the cheating scandal that occurred. So Dr. Carstarphen was brought in 2014 at the tail end of that scandal. Now, I'm not going to give a whole lot of details about that scandal because I personally was very upset that so many administrators were made examples of and given long prison sentences for this scandal. I don't have to go through my beef with the legal justice system and how they're willing to do that and make examples of perfectly good citizens who only have this as their crime on their record, and they get years upon years in prison. Whereas we see today celebrities who pay millions to get their kids into colleges and universities get 14 days. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. We're talking about the APS Board and the issues concerning the renewing or non-renewing of Dr. Carstarphen's contract and how that is emblematic of everything that's occurring in the country, if not the world. You're going to see where I'm going with that in a minute. So Dr. Carstarphen was hired when the school board was just recovering from this district-wide cheating scandal and many of the key metrics that you measure a school district by. Tenure when it comes to the employees, graduation rates when it comes to the students were at all-time lows. You could not put a Band-Aid on those problems. You needed a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. And in some cases, you had to eliminate the limbs, legs, toes, you name it, in order to save the patient. And that's what she did. And the board is not disputing that. They applaud the success that she has had in getting the school district back on track. But on September the 9th, they decided not to reward her to continue the work that she started, but to not renew that contract, claiming that now that the district was in a different place, they needed different skills. What does that mean? Well, many outlets, including the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, were quoted as saying that the board was divided over the superintendent's desire to increase collaboration and focus on closing academic institutions. See, Atlanta is like many cities that is vibrant, growing, has many economic engines, and its main school districts encompass wealthy white neighborhoods, middle-class black neighborhoods, and very poor mixed-race neighborhoods. Trying to serve all three constituencies is extremely difficult because communities that have the capabilities, the wealth, the insight, don't want to have their kids held back in a system that may require additional support and needs for those other two communities. You're trying to manage in a Rubik's Cube that continues to change colors every time you make a decision. And that's what Dr. Carstarphen was dealing with. And that's what most superintendents, mayors, governors are dealing with in major cities where you have that kind of conflict. I talked about it a few episodes earlier when I talked about Detroit being majority black, 80%, city council dominated by blacks, spending billions to renovate and renew and redevelop the city, and yet none of its 40,000 black businesses are partaking in any of that redevelopment. Why is that? Well, it's the same reason we have these problems in Atlanta with the Atlanta public schools and in many ways around the state. Maynard Jackson set into motion a wealth-creating engine that produced a very vibrant middle class in Atlanta. He used political power to force the creation of a black middle class by saying that development dollars in Atlanta would require the support of black businesses at a minimum of 10% involvement in every project that was handed down by the city or the feds, including the airport. And that created a community that many of those who sit on boards and sit in corporations benefit from today. And we're at a turning point as to whether Atlanta will continue to be a mecca for everyone, including blacks and black businessmen and whites and white businessmen and women and black women businesses, all of them, every community. We're at a turning point, and this particular instance, the non-renewal of Dr. Carstarphen, is an indication that we might not be getting it right. Dr. Carstarphen, whose contract ends on June 30th, 2020, released a statement saying that the disparity in education outcomes for Atlanta's children have been intergenerational and systemic. The solutions are not easy, which is why I so passionately wanted to stay and finish the job I was hired to do, unquote. Chairman Estevez said, given the deep divisions both amongst the board members and in the community, I think it's time to move on. No, Chairman, it's not time to move on. It is time to dig our heels in and continue towards solving very difficult problems that require extraordinary measures. Some of you don't know that Winston Churchill was fired for predicting how the political climate would lead to a Second World War. He was brought back when everything he said came true. And that's what I think is happening here. We see the problems. We have a leader that is willing to take on the fight, but not a board that's willing to face the fight in the way that's best for all children. So here are the 5 reasons why I think they got it wrong. First, Dr. Carstarphen is the absolute best leader to have for this period in time for the Atlanta public schools. Now, I may be a little biased. I've known Dr. Carstarphen since we were both in elementary school. We grew up in Selma, Alabama. And I can tell you the only thing that has changed about her since she was 7 years old is that she's gotten older. She's always been brilliant, passionate, and has had a deep love for the public schools. Being a public school teacher in Selma, Alabama, before she left to go off and try to help communities all around this country. She is the right person to take on this problem because she is transcendent. She understands the issues that affect Black, brown, Asian, white kids in poor communities and is not willing to turn her back on those kids, even when facing political opposition. Nothing's going to change her from doing that. She's shown it time and time again in every school district that she's been in charge of. Literally, she should have a t-shirt labeled "No Child Left Behind" because she refuses to leave children behind. Now, that doesn't mean she's not up to the task for making tough decisions, because that's how she makes sure every kid gets put on the right boat, moving in the right direction. She'll make the right call. Just like Winston Churchill, she'll speak truth to power and then push back against power to make sure the agenda moves forward. And that's where the conflict comes from. Trust me, power does not like to be checked. Power does not like to be outmaneuvered. Power does not like to be proved wrong. And Dr. Carstarphen will do all of those things in pursuit of making the school district, and school district being defined as kids and not administrators, principals, teachers, but kids, better. That's why she is the right person. She is the right person. She has one foot in the legacy of Selma, Alabama, and the other foot in places like Harvard, where she graduated from. She understands the issues. She understands the community. She understands the dynamic of the interplay between wealthy neighborhoods wanting to isolate their kids and give them everything they can afford, and the fiduciary duty of the superintendent and the board to make sure that all of that learning, expertise, knowledge is shared across the entire school district, despite opposition from those who may have more than others. And I know I've been in those situations where I go, wow, I paid a lot of taxes. I want my kids to have all the best. Why do I have to share that? Well, it's called a public school, and it's for a public good. But I don't think many of our board members or community leaders quite grasp that concept. That our country, that our economy are at a turning point, at a junction point, that we can't afford to keep leaving people behind. We got job shortages. We have people who aren't capable of filling those jobs because we've left too many people behind. As Dr. Carstarphen said, intergenerational. And she is that right person. She's willing to take the political hits. She's willing to stand in front of the train. She's willing to push back to make sure the right answers are implemented. You see, I love that. I love it when you have a superintendent that's not dependent on her paycheck, so that she can now make decisions that's best for all the kids. See, past superintendents may have had the same passion, same goals, but when you have a board that is in the pocket of many different interests that supersede that of the kids, that influence can let that superintendent know we have control over your paycheck. So play ball with us, or don't continue to accept that very lucrative check you get from us. Dr. Carstarphen will give you that check back. One, because she has that kind of character, and two, because she doesn't need it. And so she can speak truth to power without worrying about whether or not she's going to be able to eat next month. That's why she is the absolute best, and you're not going to find better. That's point number 2. By getting rid of Dr. Carstarphen, the absolute best qualified and best positioned superintendent to tackle these problems going forward, these political and economic problems, you have now eliminated all other potential candidates who would have considered Atlanta. They're not coming here. They're not going to sit down in front of a board that can't see the bigger picture. You see, you need someone that can manage like a Maynard Jackson did with the help of Coca-Cola in guiding the city past these landmines towards a better Atlanta. And that's Dr. Carstarphen. Absent that, you're not going to get that top tier candidate because they know they don't have the support of visionary board members the way the chairman of Coke, Mr. Gasweta, had in the previous chairman of Coca-Cola, who saw that a relationship with Maynard Jackson was the thing he needed to cultivate to build this town, to build this community, to build a thriving black community. If you don't have visionary board members that can look beyond their own community and go, this is right. I'll take the heat from my own neighbors because this is right. Guys, I never said this was easy. People like President Rockefeller was called a sellout to his own groups, his own constituents of wealthy businessmen, because he said, I got to do what's right. John F. Kennedy, same thing. Black people aren't the only ones called sellouts. He was called a sellout to his class for pulling the rug out from under big oil and not giving them all the government set-asides that they currently get today. He was called a sellout for taking control of the U.S. currency and pulling it away from the Federal Reserve. See, these aren't the cool things that you hear on the nightly news when they talk about JFK. He was going toe-to-toe with the elites in saying that if this country is going to continue to stand for its ideals, someone has to stand up to those with power who continue to demand more power and more money at the expense of the entire system. And so you're not going to get another superintendent that is capable of doing that. You're going to get a superintendent that's willing to go along with those demands, with those politics, in order to keep a job. And that's not going to lead to a very good outcome. You see, Atlanta's a lot like California. California is really a state made up of 3 different economies, 3 different masters. And the governor struggles at trying to make policy that makes everybody happy. Can't do it. Very hard. There have been more votes to split that state up into multiple states so it could be easily managed. And that's what Atlanta's dealing with now. Success does breed more problems, more complexity. And so you have more neighborhoods now with a voice that is demanding more for their neighborhood and not for the system as a whole. If we don't get this right, we're going to be right where South Africa is. Blacks came out of apartheid thinking that there would be real changes. And what they've seen is symbolic change. Blacks put in power, political power, with no real teeth to that political power, while the majority of blacks still suffer from economic disadvantages, social disadvantage, education disadvantages, because the blacks who are in power have not yet learned how to leverage political power to create real lasting, sustainable economic power for those who were most impacted by apartheid. That's the third point. We haven't learned how to govern. When you have political power, when you have the majority of voters, why is it that you can't create the society that you want? Ferguson, Missouri. That's where Anthony Lamar Smith was shot and killed and riots broke out. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how a predominantly black town is being held at the mercy of a system that is oppressing them when they have the votes to release themselves from that oppression. In Ferguson, the majority of the police stops are against African Americans. Majority of those stops are looking for drugs. The majority of those stops have been found to have no drug seizures involved in them. That program has run for years. In the small minority of stops that have focused on whites, you've collected more drugs than the majority of the stops that were focused on blacks. The data itself should point to a change in policy and a change in focus. Instead, the program has been ramped up to produce tickets that have gone to fund the police departments in Ferguson, making black people the source of income as opposed to good policing. You see how systemic racism creates an economy for itself? And then over time justifies itself despite the data that's put in front of you. And Atlanta, despite it being a majority black town, is still susceptible to the same types of problems, unless you have leaders who are willing to look at that data, challenge the outcome, and say, here is where the real problem is. And we have not been willing to do that. That's the fourth reason why I think the board got it wrong. We're still a novice town, unwilling to allow the data to drive the policy and the outcomes. We've seen the numbers. We know the communities that are the most devastated here in Atlanta. And we know what it's going to take to correct the problem. But instead of correcting the problem, you can do like they did in Ferguson and say to yourself, we need that income, so let's just convince ourselves that all black people are drug addicts, are drug pushers, drug users. And that will justify us continuing to pull them over and give them tickets, despite the fact that we aren't finding any drugs. If you look at the data and see the outcomes and convince yourself that these kids don't want an education, don't deserve an education, and use data like graduation rates as the reason to justify that warped thinking, and the type of thinking that says we should keep every dollar on one side of the school system versus the other, you're going to build a broken society that yields the kind of problems that we're facing all across the nation. And trust me, you're not going to keep Dr. Carstarphen in that position without her trying to fight back against that kind of thinking. And she will take extreme measures to try to implement real solutions. The board should be applauding that. But that leads to the fifth reason why they got it wrong. They think they need a business manager and not a superintendent. Yeah, Atlanta's always been known as a town run by developers. It has always been a town that has embraced public-private partnerships. As I mentioned earlier, Maynard Jackson and Coca-Cola tightly bound together to produce some wonderful outcomes. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of public-private partnerships, have participated in them for the majority of my business life. So I know they work. And the way they work is that both the public and the private entity have to have aligned objectives and goals. And in the case of a school system, it has to be goals that are focused first around the kids. Dr. Carstarphen is not going to support a public-private partnership if the balance is tipped in favor of the private entity against the benefit of the kids. She's just not going to allow that deal to go forward. No matter who the corporation is, no matter how much money is involved, no matter what names are involved, she's just not going to do that deal. She is not going to stop moving forward if the numbers say you can't support an infrastructure in a community because of declining enrollment or lack of funds. She'll make the hard decisions to cut down to the bone to right-size that ship so that the most people can get to safety. But from what I can read between the lines of what's been posted, the board wants a deal maker. They want someone refined in the art of the deal who's willing to come in and listen to and implement more of those deals that produce these lopsided benefits that don't support all the kids. And I know some of you are sitting there thinking, what's wrong with that? If the private entity gets 2/3 of the benefit and the public school gets 1/3 of the benefit, why not do that deal? Well, in deal making, you go out and look for another deal. Maybe you can get a better deal. And that's what Dr. Carstarphen has typically tried to do and push. Now, what that means is that sometimes there are twisted alliances and allegiances for the people who push the first deal. And that's what has to be ferreted out and pushed out of the thinking when it comes to policy making for the Atlanta Public Schools. I'm not calling out any names, not trying to step on any toes. I'm just giving you the 5 reasons why I think they got it wrong. And yes, I could be biased. Matter of fact, I know I am biased. I think the world of Dr. Carstarphen. I think the world of everything she has done to push education forward in this country. As a matter of fact, she'd make a terrific chairman of the education department. Much love, Patty DeVos, but you ain't got nothing on Dr. Carstarphen. She should be sitting in that chair. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I didn't, because I don't like the outcome, obviously. I love Atlanta, and I love all the communities that are involved in this discussion. And I know we can be better. I hope we will be better. Maybe by some miracle, they will invite Dr. Carstarphen back. I'm going to put it out into the air and let karma do its thing. Guys, before I get out of here, I want to tell you that I am teaming up with Airbnb Open Homes, a program that enables community members to offer free temporary housing to people displaced by disasters. And I don't have to tell you about all the disasters we faced this year. Fires in the Amazon, hurricanes left and right. And now is the time to make sure every resident has a safe place to stay. If you are able to offer free temporary housing for neighbors impacted by a disaster, sign up to be an Open Homes host by going to airbnb.com/M Peterson. That's airbnb.com/M as in Mary, PETERSON. You will only be contacted when there's a need. No one's going to bug you every other minute to let someone stay there for free. It's only in a disaster. Guys, this will add a great tool to our community's disaster response toolbox. Okay, guys, I hear those drums. That means it's time for me to get out of here. This has been The Mark Peterson Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony Peterson. Till next time, guys. Peace.